Good day, everyone. Welcome to the morning meeting. Sean, Dan, and I, and a yes, it's right number, very special guest are going to walk you through the day's news. As always, we're here with peace, love, and understanding, the presumption of grace towards all, to talk about what's going on. And we're going to talk about today some things maybe a little bit contentious, but you're here just to learn and understand and educate. And it's going to be what I consider to be already one of our finest programs. We haven't even done it yet. Thank you for being here. If you're watching on YouTube or Twitter, aka X, welcome. Feel free to participate in the chat, but don't write smack in the chat because that's not what we're about. Here on the two-way platform, wonderful opportunity for you to ask questions, participate in the conversation by raising your electronic hand. If you raise your physical hand, it will have no impact whatsoever. So don't do that. But raise your electronic hand and get a chance to ask questions. When you find out in great detail who our special guest is, there'll be a line out the door. It'll be like Emac and Bolio's in Harvard Square on a Saturday night. Thank you again for being part of Two-Way. Today, the day book. All the former presidents, 5 former presidents, and the current president, for all the living former presidents, will be at the National Cathedral as Joe Biden gives a eulogy for his longtime friend and colleague and mentor, President Carter. 10 o'clock, it'll be live everywhere. It'll start just as we're going off the air, so recommend that to you. No other public schedule for any of the principals except for President Trump, who flies back to Florida after the funeral and meets with Republican governors, including, we're told, Ron DeSantis tonight at Mar-a-Lago. Few other things on the schedule. Senator Schumer, 2 p.m. press conference to talk about the Democratic Senate legislative priorities in the 119th Congress. So first up, guys, I want to talk about the ex-presidents, the President's Club, one of the most exclusive clubs in the world. We've not seen, we don't believe we've seen this exact configuration of folks who will be seated together with spouses. And there's always something about that tableau visually, and then of course a lot of reading of the body language of who's whispering to whom, who's laughing to whom. There's almost always some great George W. Bush, Michelle Obama byplay. If they're given that opportunity, those two seem to hit it off. Sean, what are your thoughts about the event today, including the presence of the President's Club?
I think you're right on all of the aforementioned stuff. I will be interested in how much interaction there is between President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump with the others, right? That, as you kind of alluded to, there's some interaction that's been known to happen among some of the other folks. But I will be interested to see how much they interact with Trump this time. There's been if a couple of the previous funerals and such, there's been a sort of a frosty relationship that is almost palpable in the room. And so how that interaction goes will be fascinating. I think we always look at the facial expressions of everyone during some of the key things. What interaction is there also with others to President Trump, key leaders in the room? So that's kind of sounds like a red carpet thing, but that's kind of what I'll be looking for.
Yeah, Dan.
Yeah, after the campaign season, it's always nice to just see them all kind of shake hands and be together. I will venture that at least one former president will be pretty chummy with Trump, and that is Bill Clinton. He usually can't resist a good conversation, and I think he finds him entertaining, and vice versa. So I would imagine both Bill and Hillary Clinton will have a few words with them.
Opens the door to
you think Hillary? I agree with you, Dan. I think that former President Clinton, I think you're absolutely right. I sort of will be intrigued by your point on Hillary, though.
Oh, yeah, she loves it.
You've opened the door for me to remind everybody what Hillary Clinton said when asked why she attended Donald Trump's second wedding. She said, because he's fun to be around. Exactly revealing about both Secretary Clinton and about Donald Trump. All right. We've not talked much about the fires here. It's a tragedy, and I hope you don't, like I do, have friends who you receives texts from in the last few days saying their homes are gone. Horrible human tragedy and still a raging situation. But the politics of it really ramped up in the last 24 hours, including sniping between Donald Trump and Governor Newsom and questions about the mayor. There's a reality to this. And again, our primary emphasis is going to be on the human loss, and a few people have died, but the people's memories and property and rebuilding is going to be very difficult, in part because California has very onerous requirements to build a house. And so one thing that's emerged is this question from the Republicans, certainly, but now from some Democrats, the question of one party rule in California and the questions of, did things lead up to this regarding personnel, regarding environmental policies, other public policy decisions, budget cuts that made this disaster worse than it had to be? That, as I said, is something Republicans are certainly talking a lot about. But here's a tweet from one of Sean's favorite actresses, Sarah Foster. Now, if you Google, if you don't know her, you never heard of her. Maybe she's a longtime actress. She's very connected in Hollywood. She's kind of like 3 degrees of separation away from lots of different famous people. Her father is a big music producer. Here's her tweet, and she's a Democrat. We pay the highest taxes in California. Pretty close to true. I'm fact checking as we go along. Our fire hydrants were empty. That's been widely reported that water has been disappearing from the hydrants. Our vegetation was overgrown. I can personally attest to that. Brush not cleared. Can attest to that with my own eyes. Our reservoirs were emptied by our governor because tribal leaders wanted to save fish. I don't know that that's true, but again, I know that's been widely reported. Our fire department budget was cut by our mayor. True. But thank God drug addicts are getting their drug kits. True. Then she asked the mayor and the governor to resign. She says, your far left policies have ruined our state. That's the big debate question, and also our party. We all know California is a great place. It has abundance of everything. It's one of the fifth largest economy in the world, I think. It's got everything. It's really one of the great crown jewels of America. And yet there is a perfectly sensible critique that policies of one party rule, there used to be a Republican Party in California, there's not currently, has led to bad decisions in public policy that may have contributed, and Sarah Foster thinks it has, to the scope of this disaster. Dan, what would you say if Sarah Foster was on our show today? Hopefully she'll be on tomorrow.
I think there's a lot of frustration in California, and particularly the Los Angeles area, about a lot of things. Homelessness, the housing crisis, what I'll call small crime. And this is kind of, it's been boiling, kind of like in New York City, the way the immigration crisis kind of, brought a lot of other issues to the surface and a lot of anger came out. I don't know enough. I've been trying to read the last 48 hours, what's truth and what's fiction. I don't believe Donald Trump has helped the cause with some of the things that he said. But as you say, Mark, there are even some Democrats speaking up in frustration about stuff. And I think, look, a wildfire and winds gusting at up to 100 miles an hour is not the result of a politician. But certainly when you have one party rule and things have not been going as well, and your mayor is in Africa and kind of didn't seem to kind of get right on a plane and come home immediately, it just, I think, is the perfect storm, no pun intended, of a lot of frustration in Southern California.
Sean.
Yeah, there's a great, I just want to start with the comment that you made, Mark. I mean, I have high school friends that are posting updates as to their homes, the status of their homes. And I honestly stopped for a moment and just, after hearing some of these people share their experiences on television, and no matter where you stand, the idea of sitting back and watching all of your possessions disappear on Earth. And in some of these cases, it's way worse than that. There's a lot of people who've had their insurance canceled, who've lived in a home for years. You're hearing stories of that. And I just can't fathom, outside the loss of life that people experience, what it's like to watch, a home and all of your possessions disappear, and your heart has to go out for those folks. That being said, as we've discussed before in the case of North Carolina, it's important to discuss this. There is no question Karen Bass cut over $17 million from the budget of the fire department. One of the battalion chiefs was on the Today Show early this morning talking about the impact of those cuts. You can't make policy discussions and then say during a time of crisis you can't discuss those policy decision choices. There is no question that this is happening, and this is not, I mean, whether or not some people are going over the top or not is a separate discussion. But the policy choices of Karen Bass and some of the Democrats out there are coming home to roost, and they need to be held accountable for them. I don't know why it's okay to criticize Republicans during natural disasters for how they handled certain things, but you can't hold people on the left accountable when things go wrong. In other cases, when there is a direct correlation between policies leading up to it and budget cuts. So it's unfortunate that we have to do this, but there's a reality. And this is, I would say that what I also want to just, I'll put a pin in it by saying this. We're probably the only ones having this discussion. When there were issues of in North Carolina and other things, it's always been what Republicans have done, where the president was. Where's the discussion now? I've flipped around all the stations, and aside from Republican criticism and people posting on social media, there's been zero discussion on CNN, on NBC, on ABC about the decisions from Governor Newsom, Karen Bass, and others leading up to this. It's mind-boggling how they get a pass from the media on their degree of accountability when it comes to the policies and the budgets that they passed.
There needs to be accountability, but the last thing I'll say is I hope that Governor Newsom and others and the city council, it's a weak mayor in LA, it's just not her personally, but the way the system works. I hope they find a way to make it easier for people who want to rebuild. Because if the current rules stay in place, it will be not just financially impossible, but it's a matter of time, very difficult for people to rebuild. All right, we'll come back to that. And again, if you want to ask questions about the fires and the politics of the fires, feel free as you raise your hands to get in the conversation. So I want to introduce Rufus Gifford. Some of you may know him, but some of you probably don't. So I thought about there's two ways to introduce him. One is to say he's a combination of Clark Clifford and Vernon Jordan, and I would say maybe a little bit of who would I add in? Maybe a little bit of Terry McAuliffe. He's an incredibly enthusiastic supporter of things he believes in. He also, and one of the main reasons we have him here today, also maybe a little bit of George Hamilton too, he was the U.S. ambassador to Denmark for 4 years. And the best way to introduce him in that capacity is to show you a little bit of this 101.
Jeg heter Rufus Gifford. I am both honored and thrilled to be the next United States ambassador to your Kingdom of Denmark. I believe that the world prospers from the close relationship our countries share, and I am committed to creating an even stronger strategic partnership to meet today's global challenges. During my time in Denmark, I will work to expand trade and investment through economic cooperation, and will continue to strengthen our ties with Greenland and the Faroe Islands. Vi ses snart I Denmark.
All right, Mr. Ambassador, welcome. We're so happy to have you. There's so many topics we want to cover with you. First, I just want to do some basics. Besides, again, thank you for making time. What's the language you were speaking there?
That's Danish. Jeg taler dansk.
How's your Danish? Can you order a dinner in Danish?
Min dansk ikke så godt, but you try. You know, I did my very best to. That just means my Danish is not so good. But
I hear the umlauts in your voice.
Oh, exactly.
I can hear them.
You know, I gotta say the bar for Americans overseas is so damn low that you can just say 2 or 3 things and you can endear yourself to an entire.
Yes, including I know how to say my Japanese is still not good in Japanese, and that's all you need to say. Just some basics. You mentioned Greenland in that video. How large in the psyche of Danes does Greenland loom? Do they ever go there? Do they think about it in terms of economics or national security? How present is that in their minds?
This is how I think about it, and this is how I think Americans should think about it. It's an extraordinarily important part of the kingdom. It's obviously they have hundreds of years of a relationship, which is fraught. Don't let me oversimplify it. It's a fraught kind of colonial relationship between Denmark, between Copenhagen and Nuuk, between the Denmark proper, European Denmark, and Greenland. That being said, I think geopolitically, it's an incredibly important part of the kingdom. And over the course of decades, really, going back hundreds of years, but really more importantly, since the end of World War II, it has established itself as a slightly sort of independent entity. It's kind of a combination. The way I describe Greenland in the kingdom, it's kind of a combination of a U.S. territory and actually a U.S. state, because they do have official representation in Copenhagen as well. Like they have elected officials that serve in the Danish parliament, for example. So it's a complicated relationship. It absolutely is. There's been an aggressive kind of independence movement in Greenland, similar to what you've seen in sort of Quebec and Catalonia and whatnot. So it's important, and I do think a lot of the issues that make Donald Trump interested in it are the reasons why, in many ways, it's very, very important to the kingdom. Obviously, It's an Arctic nation. There's a military piece of this. There's an economic piece of this. There's just sort of a geostrategic piece of this. There's a countering Western adversaries piece of this. So all of it makes it actually a critically important part of the kingdom. And I will say this too, even though the relationship between Copenhagen and Nuuk is fraught, the royal family, what's actually interesting, the royal family, you may have seen this, the new king, who's the new king of Denmark, actually just edited the sort of, he was coronated last year and actually put Denmark sort of front and center in the new royal seal of the Kingdom of Denmark, sort of letting folks know how important Greenland is to the kingdom. That's real.
Leaving the national security and defense piece aside, and as I understand it, it's not just kind of the security umbrella, but people from Denmark patrol the isolated areas. Leaving that aside, could Greenland survive as its own country if they fought for independence and got it? Could they survive if they had security maybe provided by the U.S. or NATO?
Yeah, so I think it's this. I would say myself personally, and I don't get a vote, myself personally would be a little bit skeptical of strict Greenlandic independence. Obviously, a lot is made of the financial support that Greenland gets from Denmark every year. And obviously,
what is that in the form of? Is that just they subsidize the local budget?
It's cash. Yeah, it's cash. I mean, essentially, it's
But to individual residents, like in Alaska, or just to the local government?
I believe, honestly, I believe it's to the local governments. I should know that, but
I have a million questions. I have a million of these practical questions, and you're a great resource for it. So I'm just going to ask you a few more, but I'm saying for the record, I'm squelching about 100 others.
Yeah, sure.
Who makes the money off the minerals now? All these valuable minerals we hear about. Is that a big bottom line thing for the Danish government?
Not yet. And I will say this. This is a really important part of this conversation, because economic security, of course, is one of the arguments that Trump is using as it relates to his desire to purchase Greenland. We're just scratching the surface as it relates to the potential economic possibility there. There are a couple. Let me just throw a few things out here, though. So, and the Chinese are interested. In fact, the Chinese have opened up a couple of mines in Greenland. There's no doubt about that. There's zero reason why the United States can't do that right now as well. We would love that. I mean, the Greenlanders would love that. The Danes would love that. This is private industry doing what private industry does. They should build hotels. We should build hotels. We should build airports. All of that can happen. The Greenlanders would love nothing more than to do it. The challenge, let me just say this.
Go ahead, please.
One of the things, because we did a lot of oil and natural gas exploration when I was ambassador, the problem is this part of the world is still an extraordinary, complicated, and expensive place to do business. We have one military base left there. It was called Thule when I was there. Now it's called the Pacific Space Base. I believe it was, when I was there, the most expensive base in the world the most expensive military base in the world to maintain. So the private industry, obviously profit driven, is potentially skeptical of investing in Greenland, simply because there's a lot of work that needs to be done from an infrastructure standpoint to actually make it profitable. That being said, look, I think the potential is real, and with melting sea ice and melting land ice, that is what people talk about. That being said, you don't need to purchase Greenland in order to do it. American private industry could go do it right now, and there's really not. I mean, other than the standard bureaucracy associated with doing business in that part of the world, there's nothing holding us back, and we would encourage it.
All right, I got a two-part question. I'm going to turn you over to Dan. And again, I'm so grateful to you for all this.
No, please. I love it.
Why? Now, one of the things I've learned is that it's become a more strategically important and economically vital place because of global warming. And because the ice has melted to allow extraction to be more cost effective, it means there's more likely that the Chinese are going to be in those waters. Why haven't these two things happened? Why hasn't the Danish government invested in a way? Why aren't there more hotels? Why isn't there more tourism? Why isn't there more extraction? It seems like the Danish government is sitting on this hugely valuable thing. They haven't done as much as they can. And then, relatedly, why hasn't NATO put more there? Like, why did we let the Chinese open mines? Why aren't we opening the mines? Why aren't we building an even bigger base there than we had, as expensive as it is?
Let me take the military part first. Yeah. The military part is actually, the American military presence in Greenland used to be quite large. So we had, I believe it was 3 fully operating bases in Greenland in the aftermath of World War II. Really, It was an extraordinarily strategic, and you made the point earlier. You were making the economic argument that Greenland is more strategically important than it's ever been now. That was not the case back during the Cold War. I mean, considering Greenland's proximity to the then Soviet Union, the military presence in the American military, NATO military presence in Greenland was extremely important to the West, to the alliance. The main commercial airport in Greenland, which is called Kangerlussuaq, used to be an American military base. We closed it. There was another military base in the south that we closed as well. So the only one remaining is Thule. Now, I will tell you this, that again, if we wanted to up our military presence on Greenland, or NATO wanted to up their military presence in Greenland, again, a lot of this is a cost argument. It is an incredibly challenging place to get to and to actually have human beings live. You really do have to bring in everything and actually build the infrastructure. Thule, or the Pacific Space Base, has done that. But it's at a time when governments are making tough decisions as to where to invest. Greenland has to be at the forefront here. So it is, I think the Greenlanders and the Danes would welcome further military investment.
So why, and my second question, which was my first question, why haven't the Danes made it more than they have?
Well, on the military, from a military standpoint?
No, economics, well, tourism, extraction of minerals.
Well, for example, I'll give you just one example. They actually just did. So there used to be commercial flights not too long ago between the continental United States and Greenland. They weren't commercially viable, so they canceled them. You used to be able to fly from BWI directly to Greenland, commercial flights. I forget what airline it was, but they weren't commercially viable, so they ended those routes. They just opened Nuuk, the capital. You to fly to Greenland, most people, unless you have some fancy private way to get there, you have to fly to Kangerlussuaq, the old American base, and then take another plane to Greenland. And considering the weather, you have to sort of set a week aside because it's very, very complicated to move around. They just opened up a larger commercial airport in Nuuk, so it makes it easier to get to. Ilulissat, which is the main sort of tourist destination, kind of in the middle of the west coast of Greenland, where all the icebergs are and whatnot, where the sort of ice sheet melts. They have built a number of hotels over the course of the last few years, but ultimately this is about demand, Mark, right? So you need to encourage, if you go to the Visit Greenland website, which is kind of the main tourism website in Greenland, it's a beautiful website. We still got to get people there, right? So right now you either have to fly through, an American would have to fly through Copenhagen in order to get to Greenland, or there are some flights from Iceland, I think, in the on season. But so if we can try to create this market, which every U.S. ambassador has tried to do, with some more success than others, we would love it. The Danes would love it. The Greenlanders would love it. This isn't just about this isn't just about Denmark. Denmark invests a lot in Greenland. I think it's about all of us who actually want to open this up. In the same way, the model that the Greenlanders use constantly is Iceland. So Iceland is somewhat similar. Obviously, Reykjavik right now, I'm a Boston guy, like Sean is, or New Englander, like Sean is. The flight from Boston to Reykjavik is what, 3.5, 4 hours, something like that. It's obviously, people go for long weekends. They would love for Greenland to be the same thing. Iceland has built that infrastructure. Greenland, admittedly, is, 10 times the size of Iceland. I think there's 50 kilometers of roads on the entire island. So it's very different than Iceland. So there's lots, and the climate is nothing like Iceland. It's actually much more severe. So there's just tons more money to invest. There's tons more work to do. If folks want to do it, everybody is open to that. Everybody is open to that. But it's got to it's got to be profitable. And there's got to be a demand for it. And that has not historically existed. So that's kind of where we are here.
How many times have you been there?
9 times.
9 times. All right, Dan, take over.
Probably nine times more than most people on here. So
and 9 times more than Donald Trump. So
but not Don Jr. now.
Don Jr.
Yeah, 8 times more than Don Jr. Yes.
So Rufus, one of the things you hear is that this is not the first time an American president has talked about some sort of alliance or acquisition of Greenland. And obviously, I think Harry Truman did this or explored this, years ago. What do you say to people who say, like, hey, Donald Trump's not proposing anything new, right? He's just picking up what others have talked about.
And so this is, I think, one of the biggest misconceptions or the biggest sort of oversimplifications of this entire thing. So yes, Harry Truman wanted to buy Greenland. Guess what the difference between now and when Harry Truman wanted to buy Greenland? NATO. So Denmark is a founding member of NATO. So Donald Trump uses these arguments involving national security as to why the United States needs to purchase Greenland. Greenland is a NATO ally. Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Thus, if there was any military invasion or incursion of any sort in Greenland, it would invoke Article 5, and the alliance would be compelled to respond. So it doesn't, to me, from a national security argument, it doesn't make sense, because whether or not Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, whether or not it's American, or whether it's not, or whether it's like Iceland, kind of an independent nation that is a NATO member, even though they don't have a functioning military, they're supported by the alliance. It actually makes no fundamental difference, especially considering we do have a military presence there. So the national security argument, that in essence, what Harry Truman was trying to guard against, which was the Soviet threat, potential Soviet threat that's that close, NATO was the solution to that. And that one of the reasons why NATO has been such a successful alliance is because we don't have to do this anymore. We don't have to control these countries anymore. The whole alliance, it's sort of an all for one and one for all. And so the thing that scares me the most, Dan, about the entire argument on national security is that in my mind, it could be showing Donald Trump's cards as it relates to his feelings about NATO. Because the truth is, the only reason why I think a national security argument holds any water is if he wants to withdraw from NATO, if he wants to pull the United States out of NATO. And I think that should scare all of us fundamentally.
So the other thing I would ask, and then Sean, I think you might want to jump in, is it's pretty apparent what we would like from if we acquire them. But let's say acquiring the territory is not the ultimate goal. It is some sort of deal or negotiation. What would the Danes want from us, other than selling more Ozempic? What would the Danes like from us in a deal?
So, guys, I think this is sort of the most important part. And as someone who does love Denmark and Greenland, I think they don't want anything. I mean, that's the thing. It's like this is actually sort of a fundamental part of who they are. So sure, could you offer them trillions of dollars? Maybe, but there probably would still have to be political will. This isn't just we elected a president who has thrived on real estate transactions. I get that. And that should be celebrated. This is not a real estate transaction. And this is part of something. We have no historic or cultural claim to Greenland. None. Zero. Like, Putin is making the argument vis-a-vis Ukraine that he has historic and cultural claims to Ukraine. We have none of that with Greenland. It is just sort of something that is a kind of, I don't want to use this word because it'll sound adversarial, but it feels like a power grab with nothing behind it. And so the point here is, when you ask the question, what do they want? They want to be respected on the world stage. And so you can offer them trillions of dollars for just like you could offer us trillions of dollars for Hawaii. That doesn't mean that we're going to do it. And I think you have to think about it that way. You don't just get, whether you're the United States president or not, Republican or Democrat, doesn't matter. You don't get to bully one of our oldest allies into getting what you want. It is just not the way you conduct diplomacy, especially not with a country and a kingdom that you've had diplomatic relationships with since 1803, and has fought and died. Look, Danes, other than Americans, more Danes lost their lives in Afghanistan than any other country in the world. Every single time we have asked Denmark to fight alongside us, they have fought alongside us. And to treat them like this in this moment is reprehensible, as far as I'm concerned.
Mr. Ambassador, before I let Sean jump in, I want to make one point clear. People from Rhode Island feel two things towards Boston: deep contempt and abject insecurity. So keep that in mind as Rhode Island Sean Spicer takes over.
My dad was a Rhode Islander, Sean, and I went to Brown, so I consider it sort of a second home.
They don't think Brown is part of Rhode Island.
I hear that. I do. Trust me, I get it.
That's actually. I'm glad you went there, because
yeah.
And I can say this: my mom spent almost 30 years at Brown, working there, so I say that with quasi admiration. I'll bottom line this. By the way, real quick point of clarification. I think Wickham or some other people in the text to Dan's comment. Novo Nordisk, which is the maker of both Ozempic and Wegovy, is based there. So that was the just point of clarification. I think some other people, but I'll bottom line this for you, Ambassador. The thing that's been perplexing to me is sort of the way in which the leadership of Denmark has responded, which is that Greenlanders will determine the future of Greenland, which doesn't sound as emphatic as it belongs to us. Like when Justin Trudeau said the other day, all hell will have to freeze over before we become a state. One, it was kind of ridiculous, but two, it was emphatic, right? It was like, that's not going to happen. And so the one I would just ask, that didn't sound to me as though that they were willing to say, just cut it out. Like, this is ours. Stop talking about it. And secondly, it seems from some of the genuine reporting that there is an openness to people in Greenland from wanting to create some relationship with the United States. And so I would just throw that out there as a topic. And then just lastly say, beyond ultimately taking it over, if that's one end, and building more commercially from a private sector standpoint, right, which obviously we could do any day, is there any middle ground? For example, some kind of protectorate status or treaty that could be signed that said we are, we're going to whatever, but is there a middle ground as well? So first, what is that relationship? And then second, is there a middle ground between private sector investment and ultimately, becoming a state?
Yeah, no, and I appreciate all those questions, Sean, very, very much. I think the first piece, when you talk about sort of the rhetoric that the Danish government may use vis-a-vis Greenland, you can't, and this may get me in trouble in Copenhagen, but you can't, they tread very lightly as it relates to their rhetoric regarding their relationship with Greenland. So meaning they respect the autonomy of Greenland. They have obviously, Greenland has made strides towards independence over the course of the last couple of decades, but they are not fundamentally not independent yet, especially as it relates to foreign and national security policy. And really, they rely exclusively on the Danes for foreign and national security policy. So I really do think vis-a-vis the sort of rhetoric, I haven't actually seen the quote you're referring to, but anytime the Danish prime minister may speak about Greenland, they will lead with autonomy because for risk of sort of ruffling feathers that don't need to be ruffled in a time. Let's be clear on this right now. The Danes and the Greenlanders are freaked out over the course of the last 48 hours. And it's largely having to do with the Mar-a-Lago press conference. So I think the rhetoric is almost like more cautious now because of that. As it relates to the second point you make, I think the answer to that is absolutely. So we even have, at the embassy, we actually have like non-military sort of a trilateral organization who does include Copenhagen as well, between Copenhagen, Greenland, and the United States as equal partners. It's largely an economic and things like education exchange, having Greenlandic students study in the United States, further American investment in Denmark. We held summits numerous times. I think you could throw a lot of energy and organization into things like that. I would tell you this, that I think if you rolled back the clock a little bit and went back because obviously Russia and China are greater threats today, in my mind, than they have been historically, to increase the American military presence and investment in Greenland. I think, look, I can't speak to it now, and I'm not part of the negotiation and haven't been for several years, but I think the folks would be extraordinarily open to that. So I think they're
so maybe more Okinawa than Guam.
Maybe, yeah, fair. Yeah, I think I keep on trying to come up with a perfect analogy here. I don't know the answer to that. But I think that, look, this is the thing about it, and this is the thing where I think people need to understand where the Greenlanders' heads are, assuming that there would probably have to be some sort of either referendum or they do have a sort of a mini parliament in Nuuk, that there'd have to be popular support for it. the popular support in Greenland is moving towards independence. It is not towards being another colony of another larger country. So you have to get in, and this is why I think Trump's foreign policy is so flawed fundamentally, is because it kind of discards the human side of it. And that's what I'm trying to speak to here, both on the Copenhagen side and in the nuke side, that you have to also understand the psyche of your allies if you're going to be successful in these negotiations. And I just don't think we're there yet. And it's or not even close is the truth. And in fact, I think the Mar-a-Lago press conference was, if Donald Trump's end goal is to purchase Greenland, was enormously counterproductive to his goal, because essentially you now have the entire populations of the kingdom sort of aligned against them and being forced to say, we are not for sale. This is not on the table, and which I think is counterproductive generally.
I'm going to ask you one more Greenland question, then we want to switch to your other hat as a big thinker about the party, the Democratic Party. Sir. This is a serious question. Which is more popular in Greenland, NFL football or Danish football?
It's a good question. Yeah, honestly, I would imagine, I don't know the answer to it, but I would imagine it would be European football. But yeah, I don't know about Danish football, but European.
But American cultural influence, as I understand, it's pretty big in Greenland, right?
It is, so sort of, yes. I think that's right. I mean, if you watch Greenlandic TV, which is where, of course, a lot of people get their sports, it's in most part for largely reasons of the ones that invest in it is European driven, Danish driven. So in order to get NFL football, having lived in Copenhagen, even in American housing for some time, it takes a little bit of work. So I don't know the answer to it, but I would imagine it would be Europe. It's still, look, the American cultural influence is real in the same way that American cultural influence is everywhere in Europe. But I wouldn't overstate it, honestly. It's still,
We may have you back if you're willing, because we have a million more questions. We're going to talk about the party. What I call the forgotten donor class. Okay.
the poor donor class. Yes.
Well,
yes.
The donor class gets a bad rap because they're a bunch of complainers and leakers and know-it-alls, but they're also very important, right? They provide resources for the party. They're leading figures in business and government and academia, right? So, and you along with your friend Jeffrey were the two big forces in raising enormous amounts of money, first for Joe Biden and then for Vice President Harris. So
$2.2 billion.
Yeah. So what's the status of the view of the donor class? Are they interested in pointing fingers at the president and the vice president? Are they interested in 28? Are they interested in the midterms? Are they interested in policy? I know it's not monolithic, but what's your general sense of where the donor class head is at about the past and the future?
Oh gosh, Mark, it's not monolithic. I think there's some folks who are angry. There's some folks who have buried their heads in the sand for the last 2.5 months and are still processing. And I don't think that process is done, honestly. I think that, by the way, I speak for myself here because I feel about all that. I feel this way, right? So I worked on a campaign where we did extraordinary work, that we raised historic amounts of money in historically short periods of time, and pitched what we had to pitch in order to get to where we needed to be. And I continue to look myself in the mirror and say, what the hell did I do wrong? And where did we go wrong? And I think that's where the donor class is. I suppose I am part of the donor class as well. But I don't know, like, I will say this, and I was ambassador in 2016, so I actually didn't work on that campaign. My understanding is that it's a very different sense after from, and Dan would know this better than I would, but the sentiment now feels different than 2016. There's less kind of like palpable anger, and certainly less of a resistance by a traditional definition of resistance. I think a resistance will build, but it's just going to be different, and it's going to be considerably more subtle. And I think, like, you got to think about what's next for folks who
Lucas, care. Can I just
please
speak on what Mark is asking? Like, there's the messaging piece of this and the candidate. We can talk about this. But from just a purely business standpoint, when you see a campaign that raises the amount of money that she does and then goes into debt, does that send questions as to the management of it? Do you go, God, how is it hard hard to go back to a donor and to say, okay, we can talk about the candidate and the messaging and the mechanics, but like, do the donors go, hey, ambassador, what do you do? You're asking me for more money and it seems like a lot was wasted, or is that not at the top of mind for donors?
So on the debt question, I will say this, and I will be I'm a straight shooter on this, Sean, and I will be self-reflective on a lot of this stuff. But I don't believe the debt story is a real story. I actually think the worst thing that could have possibly happened to the Harris campaign is to us have have money in the bank and having lost. So with a little bit of debt, and let me just tell you this, that we did not anticipate. Obviously, I thought we were going to win on election day. We all did, narrowly, close, all the rest, but we thought we were going to win. Everyone who loses thought they were going to win. Romney thought he was going to win. Hillary thought she was going to win. Whatever. The fact is, we thought this would be a protracted election, meaning there would probably be drawn out recounts and whatnot, which would have allowed us to raise more money in the sort of few days after the election. That would have certainly more than undone any limited debt that we may have had on the campaign side. So and we do have a little bit of debt, but I don't even actually know what we're going to show, and that's the truth. I am no longer obviously an employee or a part of the organization, but I think it's an overstated story. I would make the argument that it's better to have debt than what happened to John Kerry, right? So John Kerry had money in the bank. And sort of got red. And Dan knows this too because we did that campaign together. But and having money in the bank at the end of the day and losing is what really pisses donors off. But I do think the ultimate essence of your question still matters. Meaning, yes, we bought the Sphere. Yes, we did these extraordinarily expensive events in the closing days of the campaign. When you lose, there's always going to be Monday morning quarterbacking. I think if we had won, buying the Sphere, everyone would have said was like the biggest cool flex you could have possibly imagined. So and we all expect the Monday morning quarterbacking. Obviously, I don't make the budget decisions, so I can't speak to it specifically. But I get it, and we have to answer for it, and I will be here to answer for it as often as I can be.
Dan.
Yeah, I mean, look, for those who don't know, Rufus, while he's being very modest and self-reflective about 2024, the man was a senior member of the 08, 12, and the 20 campaign. So his batting average in presidentials is very, very good. So Rufus, without asking,
it was better before this one, but yeah.
It was perfect, but few people that perfect their whole careers if they do it enough. So without asking you to comment on the candidate specifically, there's a lot of talk that Harris is thinking about her future. Where do you think donors are right now? Like, are they thinking broadly and like, we're going to sit back and see where the land is in a few years? Or do you think a lot of folks, if she says, hey, keep your powder dry, will keep their powder dry?
For her specifically,
yeah.
I think the donors, I don't know if this is true on the Republican side. I think donors move forward very, very fast. So
you are the one and done party.
I don't know that. Like,
we do it really well too. Just to be clear, I think Donald Trump's the exception.
Right. I think that there is I don't see. And by the way, personally, I hope Kamala runs for governor of California. I think it would be a good move for her. I don't know if she will. I have no idea. I hope she does. That being said, I don't think right now. I don't think right now people are focusing very much on 2028, unless you're the 5 or 6 candidates that are thinking of running. I think the donor class is focused very much on sort of, what do we do now? And I don't know the answer to it. I obviously, and I can tell you over the course, I just came from New York. I'm in DC today. I have these conversations every single day. And I think it's going to be more of a, how do we think about sort of and again, it's not, I don't believe that the resistance to this second Trump term is going to be marches in the street. I think it's going to be quieter. I think it's going to be more strategic. I think it's going to be calmer. Like, I actually think, even though a lot of Dems are kind of like freaking out in their heads, I actually think there's going to be a lot less freak out publicly. And a lot, look, I can tell you this, you know what the donor class hates probably more than, well, I think I'm going to get raked over the coals for saying this, but I think that the donor class is extraordinarily skeptic of wokeness. And so do I believe that the donor class is actually will be focused on sensible, centrist policy, which I think is a very healthy thing, personally.
Dan, another question, or you want me to open it up?
And by the way, I will say this, Dan, that before you go, I am speaking for like the big dollar donor class. I'm not speaking for the high dollar, the lower dollar donor class. Obviously, both on the left and the right, the lower dollar donor class is considerably more ideological. So I can't speak to that.
I have a million questions as well, but we're running on time, so we can bring people in. And I will just say, Rufus, as a Democrat who's raised money, what you did and how successful you were for Biden, then you swallowed hard, jumped over to Harris. You guys dove in. The way you guys did that, people, critique that campaign for the rest of history, because victory has 1,000 fathers and defeat's a lonely orphan. But just kudos to what you did and the way you and the team plowed through it. It's incredibly admirable.
I appreciate that. I'm going to need a bottle of tequila if I'm going to talk about the 3.5 weeks between the debate and July 21st. So but it's dry January, so we're going to have to do that in February. So we'll do that at another time.
We'll have you back.
I appreciate the kudos very much, Dan.
I'd say it was not just extraordinary; it's historic. It's literally never been done. So congratulations.
It was awesome. The saddest part for me about losing is obviously losing, but second to that, it was I've done a lot of campaigns. I've been in the trenches. I've never experienced anything quite like this before, and it was awesome. Despite the outcome, I'll try to remember that regardless of where we are right now.
Bravo, Steve. Welcome in. Hope your questions about Greenland or the future of the Democratic Party, but floor is yours. Let us know where you are and what's on your mind.
Hey, thanks, guys. No, sorry. Actually, I'm in northern Nevada, just outside of Reno. And my question is really kind of for Dan. But first, I want to say, Mark, just to give you a tip on how to pronounce the name of our state. I moved here from California and took a lot of criticism for saying Nevada. But I moved here from California as a, sort of a political refugee. And I'm originally from New Jersey. So if you just use a New Jersey accent, you can say Nevada. Put on your Jersey Shore accent and you can...
I know it rhymes with Vlad. It doesn't mean I can say it correctly.
Yeah. So,
Steve, ask away, and the good thing about Rufus is he can answer questions about anything.
So, well, good.
Go ahead.
Especially as a Democrat. So here's my question. I was a Kennedy supporter here in the state, was in parking lots gathering signatures. That's another whole story. Now that he's nominated for the Health and Human Services Secretary, what can we say to our Democratic senators here in the state of Nevada to encourage them to confirm him? That's my question.
Great question. Rufus, why don't you go first? What do you think of RFKJ?
I'm from Massachusetts, so for me to speak ill of any Kennedy is
it's been good enough for his siblings. So
it's very true. It's sacrilege. But look, there are things I will say. Look, do I think Bobby Kennedy is going to be confirmed? I do. I actually think if Bobby and Sean, this might be controversial, and you guys may have an opinion on this. I think if Bobby Kennedy is not confirmed, it's not Democrats who are your problem. Is the truth.
No, that's true.
I think it's going to be Republicans in the Plain States that are going to have issues with some of what Bobby is trying to do in that part of with farming, big ag, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I don't believe that's my belief. I don't know.
No. I think you're right. I just I'll cede your point.
Well, and
and I think abortion is another issue.
It's actually not that. Tweet yesterday was extremely negative. I thought after their meeting. Senator Cassidy tweeted after they met and said, we had a frank meeting and I'm looking forward to the hearings. It was extremely the body language was very cold. So Dan, what do you think? Answer maybe more if you can, more a little on point to Steve's question is if you want Kennedy confirmed, what's the case you'd make to the state's 2 senators, the silver state's 2 senators?
That is correct. Yeah.
Well, look, I think the part of the appeal is the reason some Republicans will be against him. I mean, he has historically been supportive of national health care. He's historically been pretty pro-choice.
No, 100% pro-choice.
Yeah, and I think that what he's talking about in terms of cleaning up the food network, there's a lot of things that Democrats, including Bernie Sanders, has even come out recently and said that he likes about what RFK is saying. I think the one issue where Democrats have a hard time is the vaccine, his talk on vaccines. But Kennedy seems to be backpedaling a little bit on some of this. And Trump has kind of come out and said, like, we're not getting rid of the polio vaccine. We're not going to, So I think there is a chance, to Rufus's point, that the problem is not going to be on the left. It's going to be on the right. And I think a lot of senators from places like Nevada, that is a purple state right now, will look for a nominee or two to support so that they're not 100% against everything that Trump does. And RFK might be, if you took the big, I doubt they're going to be for Kash Patel and other people like that. RFK could be the one where you could potentially say, I am for him.
Yeah, okay. I don't disagree. I think Rufus is right on RFK. There's a lot of concerns on the right that he's trying to assuage the pro-life community and other aspects from his previous. I mean, the guy up until like 6 months ago was a hardcore Democrat. So, I mean, the idea that somehow we're supposed to embrace him, I think that is fascinating. I think he's right. There's a lot of concerns on that. One side note that I think is fascinating, tangential and adjacent to his nomination, is in the last several weeks, you've got Gavin Newsom and Frank Pallone, the ranking member of the House Commerce Committee, coming out asking the FDA to ban red dye. You've got massive stories on all the effects of ultra-processed foods. You have a story coming out, a bombshell story saying the EPA has been covering up the effects of some agricultural products for years, right? And then yesterday, I think it was, there's a story that comes out, and I think, I'm trying to remember if it was ABC, or NBC, but it was on one of the nightly programs that dealt with these new it's JAMA, the Journal of American, it doesn't matter, it's Journal of American Medicine, whatever, questioning the effectiveness of fluoride in the drinking water. Now, again, I'm not a doctor. It's just funny how some of these things that 6 months ago were nut job discussions are suddenly becoming like just mainstreamed without any discussion. And so you've got red dye, you've got ultra-processed foods, you've got the concerns about fluoride, and it's all just suddenly happening. And I think that works in RFK's favor, because these are issues that I mean, I'm trying to think if it wasn't Schiff, but it was, oh my God, I can see him clear as day. It was another prominent Democrat that was talking about how nuts RFK was because he wanted to get rid of fluoride in the drinking water. And then ABC does this prominent story about how there are new concerns about fluoride in the drinking water. And so that's helping RFK, I think, as he goes through this confirmation process.
Okay. Guys, we missed. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it, Steve. Please come back regularly. We missed the moment, so you can go watch it later. But Donald Trump and Melania just came into the Carter service, and as they were walking to their seats, they passed Mike Pence, and they shook hands. I don't know the last time that happened, but it was quite a moment. And I'll tip you off to it later. Melania shook his hand too, and the body language was fantastic. So you'll watch that when we're done.
Barack Obama just shook Al Gore's hand too. I don't know when the last time. That's breaking right now.
Yeah, but did Bill Clinton?
Sue, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are what's on your mind.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, I'm from Colorado, and my question is more about Greenland. I posed this to Dan on Twitter the other day. I'm more concerned about. I know we've talked about the rhetoric. Is it that Trump had in his press conference? Should you take him seriously, literally, etc.? But my concern is with Trump threatening to acquire other countries' sovereign territories through force, either military or economic. How is the world going to deal with Putin and Xi when they either threaten or threaten again to take over a sovereign country? There are certainly implications for what he's saying, wanting to take over Greenland for his stance on NATO. Thank goodness. My understanding is that he can't withdraw from NATO because of legislation that Congress put forth after his term was over. But what does this say about the United States at this point? If this is Putin's argument for taking over Ukraine.
Mr. Ambassador,
Yeah,
yours.
I'll comment briefly, Sue, and because one of the things I try to pride myself on is not being one of the things that's frustrated me, saddened me of the course of the last 48 hours is a lot of my Danish friends, many of whom are high in, and they are enormous Russian skeptics in Denmark, have said the words coming out of your president's mouth yesterday, your future president's mouth coming yesterday, were exactly what we hear in Denmark coming out of Vladimir Putin's mouth. Now, the biggest difference is that they're words, not actions, right? So Putin actually has taken action. I would make the argument that in the South China Sea, she has taken action. I think that a lot of us have a responsibility to ensure that words don't turn into action. And I do. Look, I don't know Donald Trump. I do know that a lot of what he says, he tries to do. Do I believe that he's going to use military force in Greenland? Absolutely not. I actually don't even know how it would work. How does NATO defend a NATO ally against another NATO ally? But it's I don't believe it will happen, but I think rhetoric. I just hope he doesn't do it anymore. And that's so stupid.
Can I just?
True.
It may not happen. It may not happen in Greenland, but he's definitely talking about that in terms of Panama. That Panama belongs to us. We should never give it away. We should take it back. It's not that necessarily he can take this action. My concern is it's the signal he's sending to others that are actually taking these actions.
And this is and I'll say this real.
It's concerning, to me.
I would say this. One of the greatest things about the United States, one of the reasons why the West has been peaceful and prosperous for the last 80 plus years, is because of our moral leadership. Is that we have been good for our word, and that we have essentially built alliances. And I don't think that's what we saw at Mar-a-Lago. I don't think that what we saw at Mar-a-Lago is not consistent with what has kept the West peaceful and prosperous for the last 80 years, and has used the language of American adversaries. And that's what I believe. And that's what I do think that we need to call out when we see it. And that's what we're doing right now. I think, look, in a great and healthy democracy, you can call out things you disagree with. And that's what I will continue to do in this process as well. And I hope others will.
So can I just online this for you? And I'll agree with you. I'll just agree with the ambassador. I'll agree with the ambassador on this. There will be no invasions. This is rhetoric. This is about getting a better deal. This is about asserting America, getting back and thwarting Chinese aggression in the Panama Canal. It's about figuring out a beachhead or a larger beachhead when it comes to thwarting Russian aggression in Denmark. And I understand the ambassador's right when it comes to how some of our allies and some of those people may perceive this, right? And I get that. But at the end of the day, this is about getting a better deal. And I think, he's teasing Canada. We're not invading Canada. I don't want Canada as a 51st state. My God, if you looked at how it voted, and I say that as a guy who used to live in Canada. So look.
We'd have a Dem house for the rest of the time.
Right. I was going to say, my God, that's like making DC a state. So
by the way, Greenland as well, if you make Greenland a state.
Right. So let's just, we can stop. This is about a deal. It's rhetoric. We will not be invading anyone for the aforementioned million reasons, but this is about getting a better deal for America. And at the end of the day, look, I always, for anybody who, wants to jam up the rhetoric about the press or invading countries, past his prologue, look at the last the first 4 years, look at what he did. There was actually more peace than anything else. He doesn't like conflict. He is not sending American troops to die in a war to get Greenland. Ever. So the bottom line is this is about getting better deals for America and American workers and American national security. Full stop. It will not happen.
He's using the excuse I can pardon January 6ers because Biden pardoned his son. So Putin and Xi, why can't they use that same rhetoric? Well, Trump is saying that he's going to take over these
but
countries
with
by
all due
force.
respect, Stu, he's not saying it. He was asked a question.
Has
I'm not going to rule anything out.
Has not ruled it out, and they can use whatever they want to. I just think it's concerning that the person who's going to be president of the United States is using this kind of language. He's using the same analogy for pardons that they could use to justify their own actions. It's unnecessary to go toe to toe up to that line. If he doesn't mean it, why is he saying it?
Sue, thank you. Great point of view. Very much appreciate it. Continuing my radio coverage of the arrivals at the Carter funeral, Barack Obama is sitting next to Donald Trump. Michelle Obama is not there. And they have been talking nonstop, the two of them. Most everybody
laughing,
else
by the way,
are reading the
Obama
program.
is in stitches.
Be ready for a lot lip reading all day because they just talked now. They've broken it up, but they talked for a very long time. And as Sean said, there was a lot of bon ami. The current vice president walked in, sat in the row in front of the former presidents, and they're staring straight ahead. They've talked to no one. It seems a little awkward to me. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But
no. She does not look happy. I mean, it's a funeral. But everyone else is hanging out with each other. She is
not. I don't even believe she greeted Donald Trump, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't see any eye contact there. In any event, more on that tonight. We'll have full breakdown on two-way tonight at 6 Eastern Time. We'll also have the debut of our new series called The Diner, sampling public opinion in an incredibly interesting way that you've never seen. David Burrell of Wick Insights will join us. We'll explain the first one. It'll be an ongoing series, including starting tonight, looking at the question of what do you think about Bobby Kennedy's view of vaccines? And the point of The Diner, very much in sync with the point of two-way, is to expose people to points of view they've never considered and let them hear them and then see what they think about them. How much are they open to appreciating or even believing in points of view that they previously hadn't heard? I'm super excited about it. I hope you'll join us at 6. I hope you'll also join us, all of us, tomorrow again, 9 a.m. Eastern Time. I'm not sure Rufus is coming back, but he seemed to enjoy himself, and there's no reason we can't add another white man to the ensemble here.
Hey, look, I'm gay, so I'm DEI. This crowd, I'm DEI, so it's all
Mark,
good.
Yeah.
I know we're at late. Point of personal privilege. Last night, as we ended the show, we discussed how I would watch a great episode with Mr. De La Rosa and Kennedy's. I found the discussion fascinating on multiple fronts, including David's discussion of the media, which is a separate discussion. And I thought Michael had some fabulous insights. I will comment that Biden did fire somebody. It was one of your questions. He did fire TJ Ducklow, definitely not senior. So I just wanted to prove the bona fides that I watched the show as promised. Yeah. It was a two-way street. So can you just name who I had on as a guest last night?
TJ Ducklow?
No.
No, I'm kidding.
My point is, I can show you. I watched your program last night as I promised.
Here's the difference, Sean. You said you'd watch my program. I didn't say I'd watch yours. That's
Rufus,
the difference.
If you can't tell, they both have competing evening shows.
I love that.
If you can see, I'm a man of my word. Mark.
Sean, here's why I didn't watch your show. I only watch live shows. Live is where it's at. Your show's recorded. By the time it's on, like, stuff's happened. It's like when I once met with Dan Lundgren when he was Attorney General of California. I worked for ABC. All he wanted to talk about, literally, was that Good Morning America aired in California 3 hours on tape. And he thought it was extremely disrespectful to the people of California. And you know what? I apologize here today to Dan Lundgren. He was right. I was wrong. Only live. That's what two-way is about, live. Thank you all for watching. Of course, lots of people watch these shows on our guard. Ambassador, we couldn't have enjoyed you more. Extremely interesting. We'll probably submit, for the record, 50 questions about like what they eat in Greenland, why there aren't more roads.
I've been offered seal blubber and narwhal meat.
Is there skiing? Is there good skiing there?
It's mostly cross country, but yes, there is some downhill. If you're an adventure tourist, American adventure tourist, I'm
looking into it. I'm diverting a fair amount of the two-way investment fund towards building a resort in Greenland, and we're going to triple our money and then come back and give Dan a raise.
Hey, I tell you, if anyone's interested in investing in Greenland, call me. I'll hit you up with the right people. They will be thrilled.
We couldn't be more grateful to you to come to talk about these two topics with your I wouldn't say singular expertise, but pretty close to it. So thank you very, very much. We'll have you back soon. Dan, Sean, see you all and everybody else 9 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, and I'll see you in the diner tonight at 6 p.m. Thanks, everybody.